Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenching. My name is Ben and today I'm wrenching on my 2008 Infiniti FX35. I'm going to be replacing the wheel hubs on the front on both sides of this today. So I'll show you the problem I was having and how I determined that it's coming from the wheel hubs. And then I'll get both of these swapped out. I've got wheel chocks on the back wheels, and I'm going to use the jack and jack stands to get the front wheels off the ground. And with just the passenger wheel off the ground, I can shake it side to side, and I can feel a lot of play there. It helps to make sure that your steering wheel's locked, and it's also a good idea to engage the parking brake. But that rocking sound means the wheel bearing is getting loose. Now there are other suspension parts that can cause something like that, but the reason I started looking into it is because my steering wheel was shaking pretty bad. It only does it when I get up to about 60 or 70 miles an hour, but that'll only get worse if I don't replace these now. And bad wheel bearings can do a lot of damage to other suspension parts. Things like ball joints, sway bar links. It can cause your tires to wear uneven, and not to mention the road noise while you're driving and your steering wheel shaking at high speeds. So I'm confident this just needs new wheel bearings. You can replace just the bearings, but I like doing the whole hub assembly. So I got the cheapest hubs I could find on Amazon. I'll link these in the description. I've never really had a problem using these cheap Chinesium hubs, but it would be a good idea to get OEM hubs if you can. So I'm going to start with the passenger side here. I'm going to get the wheel off, and then I'll get the brake caliper and the rotor off. This cap's got a slot in it where you can stick a screwdriver, and so I can just pry this off. And these are 19mm lug nuts. So I'll go ahead and spin those off and get this wheel off. It's a good idea to do this with the wheels on the ground, but I can break them loose with a breaker bar, and then I can finish them off with a ratchet or a battery drill. I'll take the wheel off and throw it under the car. That adds extra safety in case for some reason my jack stand fails. With the wheel off, it's a good time to inspect your brakes. At this point, I will say I do not recommend drilled and slotted rotors. I had one of these fail on me on the rear. It cracked right here on the edge at one of these holes, and that caused a whole mess in the rear that I had to fix. That was before I started this channel, but when I go to replace these on the front, I'm definitely going to go with standard rotors. So next I need to get this brake caliper and the caliper bracket off. I can take it all off in one piece. There's just two bolts holding the bracket onto the wheel hub. Here is the top bolt, and oddly enough, those are 3/4 inch bolts. So luckily I've got this 3/4 impact socket, and I can use my short breaker bar to break these loose. And this one's not coming off very easily, so I'm going to turn the wheels this way, and that helps because now I can get my longer breaker bar in here, and that makes it a lot easier to break this loose. I can put a small pry bar in here and grab onto the rotor and wedge this piston for the caliper open. That should open up this caliper a little bit and make it easier to take off. So I've got the top one loose enough that I can spin it off with a ratchet. So I'll do the same thing with this bottom bolt here. Loosen it up with the breaker bar. So now I've got both of those loose enough I can remove them by hand. I'll start by taking the bottom one all the way out. And then with the top I can hold the caliper while I remove this one all the way. I just want to make sure I don't let this caliper drop when this bolt comes out. I'll take it all off in one piece. I'm going to make sure I don't let too much weight get on this brake line, and then I can use a brake caliper hanger to hang this up here. And with that out of the way, I can get the rotor off. I turn the wheel all the way in the other direction, and while I'm over here, I can check and make sure my tie rods are good and that that's not what's causing the problem, as well as the sway bar link. I did just change these out, so I know these are probably good. So with the wheel turned this way, I need to take this ABS sensor out. Mine is held on with a zip tie because I broke the bolt on this one. And I might change this out while I'm at it because this one looks like it is stuck in there. So I'll get behind it and wiggle it back and forth a little bit. I can use a razor blade to slowly separate it, but this looks like it's stuck on there pretty good. I can try to turn it side to side and see if that helps loosen it up. I can also spray it with some PV Blaster and hope that that soaks in. So I'll give that some time to soak, and then I'll see if I can get that out.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
I let that soak for about a half hour, and now I'm going to try some tiny groove joint pliers. I like these because I can adjust them right to the size that I need. But the idea is just to grab this sensor and try to move it back and forth just a little bit to try and loosen it up. It would be best to replace this sensor because I'm probably going to gnarl it up pretty good trying to get it out. So I'll try wiggling it as I pull on this wire, and it is starting to come out because I can see the gap behind there getting bigger. And I felt something give, so I'm hoping that broke it free. And now I can turn it a lot more, so it's a lot looser. And so now there's a pretty good gap in there. So I'm going to try this trim panel tool and see if I can pry it out this way. So I can use this in combination with the tiny pliers. I can pry and wiggle at the same time. And at this point I can get these pliers in behind it. So I'll go back to grabbing it right here because I can get the most twisting force there. And without chewing this up too bad, I think I might be able to get it out. And just pulling on the back of this wire and twisting it back and forth is working the best. So there we go, I got it out. Kind of surprised that worked. You can see the snap bolt where I broke it off the last time I messed with this. Hence the zip tie that I had holding it in there. In my defense, the zip tie worked fine for quite a while. I don't remember the last time I was working on this, so it was probably a while ago and I haven't had any issues with it. That being said, I wouldn't recommend zip tying this in there, but it worked for me. So I really should try to drill that out so I can get a new screw in there. If you struggle getting this wheel sensor out, you can check out another video I have where I did the same thing on my Honda. I ended up breaking it off, trying to drill into it with a screw, and in the end I ended up replacing the whole knuckle. That is the worst case scenario here, but it's not too bad. Since there isn't an upper ball joint, it's really just two nuts here and then the lower ball joint and the tie rod end, and that thing should come off. We'll have to take off the axle nut to get the hub off anyway. So essentially it just looks like you're looking at 4 more nuts to get that whole knuckle off. At that point you'll definitely need an alignment, but we should get an alignment anyway after we change out this hub. So while I've got the wheel turned this way still, I'm going to go ahead and take off the 2 bolts holding this side of the hub in. Behind here is the head of the bolt. They are 3/4 as well. I can get my 3/4 impact socket on the head of this bolt. It's pretty tight in there, but this socket fits in there and I can get on the bolt. I can use my long breaker bar and break them loose. There we go. And same thing for the bottom one here. Both of those weren't too bad. I can use a ratchet with a small 3-inch extension to get them out the rest of the way. And now those are loose enough I can turn them by hand, so I'm going to go ahead and straighten out the wheel and get the axle nut out, and then I'll work on the other side. The axle nut's got a cotter pin. I can just bend this straight and push this through. And I'll replace this with a new cotter pin when I get everything back together. This axle nut is 32 millimeters. I can put my longest pry bar in between 2 of the lug nuts. And it looks like I'm going to snap my pry bar, so I may just have to use the impact. I really try not to use my impact in my videos as much as I can unless I absolutely have to, because I realize most people don't have a compressor and an impact gun. But this will make quick work of it. I guess I don't need the pry bar anymore. And there we go. The good news is the axle is already loose. Sometimes those are seized in the hub pretty good, and you have to get either a punch and hammer this out, or you can use an air hammer with a point tip and punch this through until this is loose like this. It's a good idea to replace the nut and this washer anytime you take it off, but I'm probably going to reuse these. I did get new axle nuts, but this old one looks way beefier than these new ones, and so I think I'll just reuse this one. But like I said, it's a good idea to replace these anytime you take them off. I'll link these in the description in case you'd rather use new axle nuts. So with the axle nut off and the axle loose, I can go ahead and turn the wheel this way and get those last 2 bolts out. So same thing on this side. I'll use my long breaker bar to break these loose. So I've got all these loose enough to get them out by hand. All right, and there's the first one. And there's the bottom one on this side. There's the bottom one on that side. And the top one's a little difficult to get to, so I'm going to straighten the wheel back out one more time. And there's the last bolt. So I'll leave the wheel straight, that way I can pull the hub straight off the axle. And I imagine this hub is rusted on here pretty good, so I may have to beat on it with a hammer to get it off. I will spray some PB Blaster in here to see if that helps. And since it's not coming off very easily, I can use this hub puller to get it off. We'll just put the lug nuts back on to secure it down. I've had this one for a while. I don't really use it a lot, but when I need it, it's great to have it. So I'll get these lug nuts pretty tight. And then I can crank down on this till it pops off. And that was an exciting dismount, but I got it off. I cleaned up my tools, and with the old hub out, I've got it side by side next to the new one just to make sure they match up. And I also got this ready for the new hub to go on. So I started with this ABS sensor screw. I got this drilled out and I've got a screw that'll fit in there. I tried to tap it too, but my taps are really junky and I wasn't able to tap some new threads into that. So I just found a nut and a bolt that'll fit through there and that'll hold on that ABS sensor better than the zip tie. I cleaned out this hole with some brake cleaner and a wire brush on my drill. And then I brushed off this surface to prep it too. I just wanted to get any surface rust off of here and inside of here. It's pretty clean now, so I'm good with that. Right now I'm rebuilding the dust plate. And by rebuilding it, I mean that I'm just sanding it down and painting it. I put a primer coat. I've got automotive primer paint, and then the only color that I've got that's close to black is this dark gray, so I'm going to use this as a second coat. But once that's done, everything's ready to put this new hub in. Looking at them side by side, they look good on the front. And on the back side, I can see that this dust cap looks the same. It's got 3 slots in it, and the old one does too. There are 2 slots that are smaller than the other slot, and that one is parallel with the top and the bottom of this hub. So the ABS sensor is not going to go in the big slot, it's going to go in one of these smaller slots. So I just need to make sure these are on the top on both sides. And then it doesn't really matter which side I put this on because it'll have a hole on the top on both sides to be able to put the sensor in. So everything here looks good. I can go ahead and get this installed once my dust plate's done drying. And I'll say I'm pretty happy with the way my rebuilt backing plate turned out. I've always had trouble sourcing backing plates. The only one that I found like this online was over $100. So that's why I just sand them and repaint them. I definitely could have done a better job sanding it, but I'm not too worried about it. And before I put this on, I'm going to put some anti-seize behind it to make sure that the hub doesn't stick next time. I think I've had this same bottle of anti-seize for like 10 years. So I'll put some along the inside and then also on this front surface here. I don't need a whole lot, but I want to make sure I cover everything. And I'm sure that's more than enough. I'm also going to use a wire brush on the threads on these mounting bolts. It's always a good idea to do this if you didn't get new hardware with your parts. Probably not a big deal if I don't do this, but I might as well while I've got them out. I'll do the same with the axle nut. Like I said, you really shouldn't reuse these. I just like this one better than the one that I bought. And so now I can get my new hub in place. I'll put the backing plate on it and line up the bolt holes. I'll get the axle through the hub, and then push it in and line up one of the bolts and get it started. Shake it around a little bit to get it to thread in there easier. And then once I've got that one started, I can get the other 3 in. And with the first one started, the rest of these go in a lot easier. Goes a lot quicker with a battery ratchet. And this side's a little easier because I've got all this room here where I took the caliper off. So I'll get both of them started by hand first just to make sure I can get them threaded in there. And after I've got all of them in, I can use a battery ratchet to tighten them down. And then these get torqued down to 72 foot-pounds. Next, I can get the washer and the axle nut on, and I'll torque this down to 203 foot-pounds. And my click type torque wrench only goes up to 180 foot-pounds, so that's gonna have to be good enough. And that's been to my pry bar, so I'm sure it's good enough. I'll have to straighten this back out. And I held on to the old cotter pin so I could match a new one from my cotter pin kit. I'll link this in the description with everything else. But that cotter pin looks good enough, so I'm gonna use this one. I'll just put it through the hole and then bend these sides back. I try to bend these around as much as I can to make sure that they're not gonna rub against the wheel. You can trim these ends off, but none of my cutters are strong enough, so I'm just gonna have to bend these down. So I'll just make sure these are out of the way and we should be good. And last is the ABS sensor here. I'll take my nut and bolt back out. I can't take this bolt out because it'll hit the axle when I try to fish it out the back. So I was fortunate to have put that in there before I put the axle in. And I'll put just a little bit of grease on this to help it slide in better. I just want to make sure it's flush with that knuckle, and then I'll get the nut on there. And that'll have to do as a fix, but like I said, it's definitely better than the zip tie I had on before. The head of the bolt that I used is a Phillips head, so it's not going to be anything I can grab onto with a wrench. I'm hoping getting this just hand tight is going to be good enough. Sensor won't move, so that's good news. I'll tighten it down with a ratchet as much as I can and hope that's good enough. Everything feels good there, so I think that's going to hold. I'll clean up the caliper bracket bolts before I get the caliper back on. Looks like I used anti-seize the last time I took these off, so I'm not going to do that this time because anti-seize will mess with your torque specs. It actually makes it so you have to over torque them by quite a bit, so I don't like using that anymore. So I'll get as much of this off as I can. Next, I can put the rotor back on. I can use a lug nut to secure it down, and just one lug nut near where the caliper goes makes it a lot easier to get that installed. This is the first time I've used a brake caliper hanger rather than just using bungee cords, and I would definitely recommend getting some of those because that was way easier. Got the caliper lined up and the top bolt started, and then I can swing the caliper to get the bottom bolt in. I use my battery ratchet to tighten these down. And then these get torqued down to 98 foot-pounds. Now I just need to get the wheel back on. I try to line up the holes so that I've got it pretty much straight, and all I gotta do is lift straight up. And then I sit cross-legged so I can use my legs as leverage. And then I'll get the lug nuts torqued down to 80 foot-pounds. I'll snug them down and then I'll torque them down to 80 foot-pounds once I get the wheel back on the ground. But before I do that, I want to rock it back and forth and see if there's any play. And that feels solid. So that's good news. So I'll torque these down to 80 foot-pounds, get it finished up over here, and then rinse and repeat on the driver's side. So I finished everything up. I'm just taking it for the old test drive, and would you look at that, 60 miles an hour and no steering wheel shake. So I think that took care of it. So that is really good news. I might keep driving for a bit because it's a really nice night here in the Midwest. Just a gorgeous sunset right now. And I feel pretty good getting in an honest day's work and getting the job done. But that's gonna do it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video.